Hello, welcome back to our podcast.
Yeah, great to see you all. It's been an exciting summer. I hope everyone watching the podcast had a lovely summer in one way or another. We had an exciting summer. You survived it, which is good. For regular watchers of the podcast, they may not know, Seb very nearly died at the start of the summer.
That's overstating it, I think. I broke my leg in a few places and then it went downhill from there. But you know, next summer is going to be my summer, so...
Yeah, well, the good thing is you didn't die.
Yeah,
We're all
that's
here.
true. That's true.
How was your summer otherwise?
I mean, it went up after coming out of hospital.
I can imagine. Did you read anything good, anything exciting? What was your tech news that you sort of got most excited about over the summer?
Did I read anything exciting beyond? Yes, I kind of read up on a bunch of different, more broader ecosystem takes, but I won't lie, the acute care unit wasn't the most conducive for deep research. But I think we have a lot of interesting news to cover as well coming back.
Yeah.
Wait, before we do, what did you do in summer?
I went away with my family to the beach. That was fun. And I had a nice time.
Fossils.
Oh yeah, we looked for fossils, found some fossils in Lyme Regis. That was very good. And I swam with a dolphin. That was exciting.
You swam with just one?
Just one. Lonely dolphin. Yeah, he needed a friend. So that was it. But yeah, some exciting news for us. We've obviously had yesterday's Phasecraft announcement, which is very exciting. So that's $34 million, I think, is their Series B. That team is doing some amazing work, and yeah, we'll continue to hit the headlines, I think, over the next 18 months as they start to really push back the sort of boundaries of what's possible in quantum. So keep your eyes on them.
Yeah, I mean, Phasecraft is obviously doing some incredible things. Stellar team. I think it's one of the more exciting British companies that I'm aware of, and I'm not even being biased right now. We also had a Humanloop exit.
Yes, a Humanloop to Anthropic. That was great. Yeah, lots of chatter online about founder exits. I think we were pleased to see them to join Anthropic. I can't talk too much about the details of the transaction, but yeah, a great home for them and a great place for them to be, and a great place for outcome for us, really.
Without pushing too hard on that, I know there was a lot of chatter kind of in the LinkedIn and VC and founder circles around the founder exits, kind of in some ways on the back of this. What is your take on that? How does that relate to, you've been in the game a while, seeing the kind of evolution from more like tech exits, if you like, to maybe a founder exit? How do you think that's evolved?
I think it's always been the case that very talented technical founders will be offered homes in large tech companies. We were involved in Bloomsbury AI, which must be 2017, 2018, that they went to Meta. And, for that to happen, the company has to release them, and there has to be an agreement between the large tech company that wants them and the company that's releasing them of all their obligations. And that can take many forms. The founders that I've worked with have always acted fairly and sensibly and rationally and respected their investors in that situation. So I've not been in part of a negative scenario where they've completely disregarded the investors and the time and energy and money that's been put in to take them to where they've gotten to. So yeah, I think sometimes there's a bit of hyperbole around, oh look, they've just gone to a large tech company and they've essentially been hired out of the company they're in, but you don't know the underlying details of what enabled that hiring.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think at the end of the day, a journey for a founder in a startup is unique to each startup and founder, and without knowing the kind of context and the background, it's very difficult to judge, the end of any given project. And I wasn't as close to the Humanloop journey as you, but from outside, I think that's again an amazing team. If I was Anthropic, I'd have been going after them as well. So yeah, I think it's and we play a power law game, right? Like I think there's a lot of talk here around like what it means for investors and will investors do deals. I think you back amazing founders, and you have to be willing to accept the fact that journeys end in different ways. And
yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
Were you as disappointed about GPT-5 as some online were?
No, because I don't think I was expecting quite the step up that I think people were hoping for. I think it's feels a little bit like I was already using sort of the deep research functions of GPT-4 like most people, and so I haven't seen like a particular huge amounts of gains in my sort of day-to-day use of it, but I think we're in a sort of gradual iteration phase right now, having had the kind of 2022, 2023 kind of big bang. Everyone got very excited, and we've seen some interesting sort of step changes since. I think we have to get used to things getting gradually better now, unless that we have other technologies come online to unlock functionality that a large language model on its own just getting bigger and having more data is unlikely to. So.
Yeah, I do think there was a kind of feeling, maybe not totally helped by the way OpenAI talks about itself, but like that we should see kind of like AGI, whatever that means. But I do think, from my perspective at least, like it looks more reliable, it's slightly more robust. Like for tool use and calling, I think it's an improvement, but it is more gradual. And I think there's an interesting element there for particularly early stage AI investors. It's kind of a good thing that it's not just a complete super intelligent being, because we make our jobs a bit difficult. Now I think there's a lot of interesting peripheral areas to invest in to kind of capitalize on it still, to make useful enterprise grade products, right? And like, whether that's memory, continual memory, kind of temporal memory, infrastructure to allow for agents to work well. I think there's a whole range of kind of AI first businesses that are yet to be created, and business use cases and ways of distribution that we just haven't really encountered. And also it means that that there may still be room for like deep architectural innovations. So
yeah,
I think it's exciting.
I mean, what Ming-Tian is doing at Vectify, probably worth just touching on that.
Yeah.
And, some of the excitement that's building around the page index at the moment.
Yeah, true. I mean, there was a paper that came out from DeepMind that, to keep it at a high level, essentially showed that there's a limit to what you can retrieve with embeddings. I know there's an argument around how commercially relevant that is, in the sense that, you could still retrieve an awful lot of really interesting information with vector databases, and I think they still have their place for sure. But there is this theoretical limit where you can't retrieve certain amounts of information just because you can't, given a certain embedding size, you just can't get all the information. And I think Ming-Tian and Vectify have built a reasoning-based approach to it, so it's not using a vector database, a bit more like how humans kind of maybe index and structure their thinking around search, and that's been doing the rounds recently. I think, as I said, vector databases and vector search have their place for a lot of different use cases, but I think thinking around how you enable and empower LLMs with different tool sets for particularly, very nuanced, maybe like legal frameworks, for example, where like one tiny figure at the end of a 10 million versus 100 million matters an awful lot. But for a kind of similarity based vector database, it may not be that far away in space. So yeah, I think it's an interesting time, and it's a good time to still be investing in frontier AI investments.
Indeed. The other thing that happened in the last few weeks is I wrote a thing.
Yeah, nice. Classic Dave, tooting his own horn.
Exactly.
I was supposed to intro that, but...
Well, okay, you intro it. I'll listen.
You wrote a thing.
I wrote a thing,
yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote a little opinion piece on something that's sort of been percolating for a while. Primarily because I think we've spoken on this podcast before. We've invested in the sort of future of compute area for a while. And 10 years ago, there was very little activity in that startup world, and now we're seeing lots of really cool startups creating really interesting compute technologies that could power the next wave of data centers and edge computing. And like a lot of the time, we feel the sort of pressure of, there's an awful lot happening in the US. Is there a place for UK technology, and what does it look like, and how can the UK compete on a global scale? And so the main thrust of that article was to say, actually, we have got amazing sets of technology that you could almost build out the full stack of a data center from, IP that's been developed in the UK. And if that's the case, given the kind of global geopolitical implications of compute right now, and as an aside, I did read the AI 2027 report over the summer, and I don't know if anyone else has read that, but just sort of it's like future casting what will happen from a sort of geopolitical level with compute, the need to have the best compute in your region, and just thinking about, actually, from the UK, we've got this great technology. How do we ensure that it gets its best possible chance at being successful? And if it is successful, that's a hugely strategically important thing to the UK. And so if that's the case, shouldn't the government be a first customer for a lot of these companies? And couldn't it develop its own data center entirely on UK tech? Put money into that. It gives those companies a boost because it gives them a first place to sort of showcase their technology and show the world that they can actually outperform other technologies across the world in the compute space. It gives them revenue runway and platform, and allows them to scale globally. Which if you look at the strategic importance of say TSMC to Taiwan, or Nvidia to the US now, like there's it feels strategically important that we give our companies the best possible chance of reaching that level.
Yeah, and I mean, I think from a first principles point of view, 100% agree. Like, in terms of from a number of factors, right? Like, I do think we have cutting edge research, we have an amazing university base, we have amazing talent, and we have, with ARM and a few others, like a history of creating these types of companies. I think that from a kind of geopolitical and strategic perspective, having full control over the infrastructure that allows you to run what will increasingly be mission critical and of kind of highest government importance, like your own models locally with your own infrastructure, and securing the supply chain for that is also very, very valuable. I think on the other hand, there's going to always be challenges given just the behemoth that the US is. I think thinking about how and where you're strategically able to get the most bang for your buck, if you like, from a government's perspective, and ensuring actually that the value accrues to the UK. Because again, if you take ARM is a great British success story, but actually if you look where most of the value accrued, it wasn't necessarily in the UK. It was in downstream other markets. And so how you actually think about it from that perspective, and how you actually truly become sovereign in such a US dominated space is an interesting question.
Yeah, the question of what is sovereignty, like, and can you be? To be completely and utterly sovereign, you'd need the fabs located in the UK and the entire supply chain, and that's not realistic. And it's not realistic for nearly any country to completely own and run the entire supply chain. So instead of creating a bunch of fabs in the UK, which is clearly we can't really afford and isn't really feasible for any country, maybe outside the US and China, maybe, what can we do that gives us some like strategic advantage, some leverage, some control? You can see a world where previously friendly partners, say the US, were to turn around to the UK and say, well, look, unless you increase your GDP spending on defence to 5%, or unless you change your freedom of speech rules because you don't like the way you control what's said on social media, or whatever it is, and if you don't, we're going to put massive tariffs on the NVIDIA chips that you're buying from NVIDIA, and so you're going to be unable to buy the compute you need to strategically compete. That puts us in a really kind of that's a position where we're a taker of other countries' worldviews, and are not able to sort of strategically secure our own. But if we can create stuff from IP that we own, then it might be that we were sourcing from US fabs, but there are other fabs. There's Taiwan, there's Korea, there's new fabs coming online in Ireland at the moment, and other places where actually we can shift the supply chain around to adjust for global politics without having to own the entire supply chain. So it just gives us flexibility. Yeah. And you have to assume we're going to be in a world where we have some friends and we have some people, some countries that want to work alongside us. But I think into that assumption, then owning the kind of IP and the ability to create the chips and just choose the supply chain, that gives you a high degree of freedom.
Yeah, that goes back to the question of sovereignty isn't binary, right? Like there is, so even if you have your fab in Ireland, well, the fab relies on tooling and systems that may be in the US, and so you can find at any point a place where the US can slap a tariff on and create leverage that will knock on. I think it's almost where I do agree is like if you can spend and focus in on specific workflows that are increasingly important. So, that may be around inference, for example, or for the largest models, or networking that really does improve speed up, but for a specific use case that the US and everyone else will rely on, and you can truly champion and create the best in class and the best in the world, you have strategic leverage back. And it's not dissimilar to maybe like ASML, right?
Exactly.
So can we create something sovereign that we don't own the whole stack, but we have something that we can rightfully use and leverage on the way back.
Exactly. Right now, it feels like we don't have much of that. We're generally a taker of other people's like power in that situation, and it seems like the right move for a government to empower our technologies to have the best chance of becoming so successful and so important that they give us that leverage in those conversations. And it's not, if the government is talking about spending a lot of money on data centers. So this is not like, we need to find loads of extra cash. It's okay, some of that money, let's build a data center that champions UK IP, champions UK science, and takes that stuff to the next level. And that gives it, a fair fight. Because frankly, a lot of the a lot of the US companies, a lot of companies in China and others are getting a lot of governmental support. DARPA and other, the CHIPS Act in the US are allowing lots of money to flow into those spaces. And we risk being left behind if all we're doing is putting our money into buying American technology.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, there's NVIDIA spends like tens of billions in R&D. So there's a big mountain for us to like cross. And I think that goes back to like about thinking strategically from a government perspective about where we have a right to win. How does that relate to the IP base that we've created and our kind of unique selling points and services that we can generate and offer within the emerging tech stack, right? Which we can, and I think the truth is Europe has a part to play. The UK should work closely with them around this. We can pool resources on a scale if we work collaboratively, but the UK needs to hold their own corner within it. They get the equivalent of an ASML. I do think that there's also a kind of existential question, right, around the UK because they have been a taker of technology for so long. Like at some point, and this feels like as good an inflection point as ever. Like some people talk about it kind of like the Industrial Revolution and the new oil. Like, can we take big bets like every country needed to do in its own form factor in its own era to be able to create sovereignty again? And I think, yes, we live in a cash-strapped time, but you can't, it's a question of a kind of slow decay over a long time, or like taking a big meaningful bet on the strengths we have now, really doubling down into them and leveraging them for a long-term return. And I think if there is a time for that and a technology for that, it's probably now.
Yeah, and whilst there's lots of things that the UK is no longer a leader in, actually like innovation and education and research is the area that we still have a massively outsized position in. Like 4 of the world's top 10 universities are in the UK. That's insane for an island of our size and our population. And so that's the bit. If you're going to bet on creating some value somewhere and creating a wedge into kind of future leverage, that's the bit you should be betting on. And so that was a kind of the reason for writing the article, is like, right, now is the time. If we're going to spend money on anything in compute, we should spend money on promoting our own compute and bring our own compute into the levels where it can compete on a global stage.
And what do you think that looks like tangibly from the UK? So, how do you think about, if you were sitting on their shoulder right now, or God forbid you were in the office, like, what would you actually tangibly do?
Genuinely, like, okay, we're going to create a data center, like a scaled data center, say 50 megawatt, whatever, like scale size, and we're going to tender and go out to find the best technologies to fill it, prioritizing UK tech. And it might be there are certain elements you can't fill from UK tech, but then you might choose quite wisely to choose like very friendly or close nations to fill the rest of the tech stack from. But make sure the tech stack you've got is from predominantly promoting our own and showcasing what it can do, because you and I both know there are some companies out there like pushing back the boundaries of what compute can do and competing on a shoestring. And so if the government comes in and says, okay, well, we're going to order, the first, 1,000 chips from you guys, that gives them cash and runway and ability to scale above and beyond where they are in the capital base. So look across like Fractile, who we know well, their inference chips have huge promise. Like, what would an order of, £10 million worth of for the first chips, like ahead of production, mean for their cash runway? The same for Oriel, who are doing the world's best optical network for data centers. Like, if you could give these companies pre-orders, give them the ability to build, and then showcase the rest of the world, like, wow, look at what these two technologies do together. Instantly, they're going to get more orders. That's going to catalyze the hyperscaler saying, oh, I've seen this in the reality now. I want to buy it for my data center. So not only does it provide cash and runway and scale and the ability to hire more people, it then provides the proof points that allow you to kind of really explode and maybe attract massive capital investment.
I think that's fair. And I think you look at how the defense space has kind of evolved in Europe as a nice analogy here, right? Where arguably we recognize the need to be more sovereign too late, where that leverage was used quite effectively. And yes, Europe is responding, the UK is responding, but thinking ahead, the next battleground could well be over the infrastructure that runs, like I say, what will increasingly power a lot of our intelligence and a lot of our services. I think it's just thinking about exactly where you sit in that and being intentional about it. And I think there's an interesting point which is maybe a further off consideration, but it ties into this kind of idea around, where the transformer architecture has pushed us, like how is scale hitting its kind of meaningful limit in terms of data scale, in the sense that we are trapped in many ways by GPUs and NVIDIA, right? Like, why would you the architectures you choose and the approaches we take in ML are often constrained by the prevailing hardware and infrastructure. And in the end, if we assume that there is room and scope for new architectures and approaches to push on beyond what we've developed, there is this need to allow and create ecosystems and environments of hardware that support the kind of creativity. And if you're thinking about how can the UK position itself for, say, not for the next wave of AI and the next kind of fundamentally differentiated algorithmic and architectural approaches, creating a fertile ground for the infrastructure that will run them effectively, and owning that is also super important. And so I think setting the precedent around actually, within the stack today, maybe it is at inference or maybe it is at networking for, a la Fractal, a la Oriole, where right now we have really strong companies that can compete at the world stage. Maybe it's not at the training chip today, but in the future, when our academic labs are creating and DeepMind or whoever producing really interesting novel architectures and novel approaches, and it's probabilistic machine learning, different things, like we have the ability to scale up a hardware company that can become globally category leading. So yeah, I think it is of arguably existential importance to the government, but the government often seems quite there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there is a lot going on, but I mean, in a world where we spend many billions on a railway line, which is there to increase productivity, and yet you look at the existential risk of not having our own compute, like it's a drop in the ocean.
It's true. I don't need to leave London.
Do you think you've ever left London since you arrived? Like, you went outside London. You went to Bristol.
Yeah, I did go to Bristol.
Home of some great compute companies.
That's true.
Graphical.
Yeah.
Exmos.
We're seeing actually a bunch of compute companies coming out, particularly in the photonics space.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, there's a bunch of like photonics hardware companies that come out of there. Good and actually, one of them that we're talking to now, looking at how you can accelerate a lot of these kinds of models with a differentiated hardware in the photonic space. And I think there's lots of good examples of that. But as it stands, a lot of these, because you're constrained by the behemoth that's NVIDIA, it's a logical perspective to take as an investor to say, well, it's a bit of chicken and egg, right? Like, if the hardware isn't there to run these models effectively, efficiently, and on scale, then why would I back a software company that's creating that? If I'm not backing that with money, then why would I create the ecosystem that necessitates the hardware development? And I think, there's interesting knock-on areas around this as well, around like increasing the speed using AI around chip design and procurement and taping it out. And can we accelerate that cycle? Like, the dream would be that you can take the kind of development cycle of a chip and get it at least somewhat closer to the design cycle of a software, right?
But I think the issues you're describing exactly where government can step in and be very effective as a first customer, because they can take that risk of putting together hardware that requires a new way of thinking about software, and that gives a room for people who are thinking about new ways of doing software some hardware to play on, actually, without government stepping in and putting some money on the table as a first customer. Like you say, investors have a hard time to say, well, I'm going to back a paradigm shift that requires like lots of moving parts to come together.
Yeah, as I said, I think there's always risk in, whether you're a startup founder or you're in the government. But at some point, and we live in a finite budget, but at some point you have to think about where those risks are strategically smart to take. And like, I would never advocate for the government to quite be as risk appetite as maybe funds are, in the sense that they can't play a power law game. But the reality is like, they need to put money behind a set of these companies and really support them over a period of time. And, if you create an NVIDIA, you return all the...
exactly. The upside is so massive. It's returns.
The knock-on question there is the one I mentioned with ARM, right? Is it's okay, yes, you can create it here, you can cause its IP to be generated here, but the next question is actually, how do you keep it here? And how do you allow for the economic windfall to actually remain in the UK? And I think that's maybe not a question that we have time to address here, but is one to think about.
Yeah, I think it almost comes slightly from, if the government is the first customer and provides that, then they have some leverage to continue to be an important customer, and have some leverage in the discussions about where the company ends up. there's been a lot of conversation about whether Arm should be, a foreign company or not. I think if the government has been the first customer and provide all that support, it's got a stronger argument to say that you stay within the UK and we bring the capital to you.
Yeah, and I think this is, in general, right? Like if every European country can start to make these bets earlier and create truly differentiated, category-defining companies, and you can start to pool economies and markets together, there's more of an argument to stay. And I think you actually see it from a founder perspective, at least anecdotally. I think there is a bigger desire for European founders now, at least some of them, often the second-time founders, to try and build and grow in the UK and Europe. Yeah. I think you're seeing that over and over again, and it's just about continue to create the ecosystem to enable that. And it's ultimately easier to do that at the earlier stages. It's the mega rounds and the public listings and where they go and think about that I think is where Europe as a region needs to continue to focus and iterate.
Yeah, and I think if you get to the point of listing publicly, I think where you then list is not necessarily problematic with where you then continue to build the economic value and the company and keep the IP and keep the kind of the soul of the company. I think there's good companies who are still very much UK centric but have listed on NASDAQ because that's the best place to raise capital. I don't think the two things are necessarily problematic.
Fair enough. So are you gonna try and help the government, or are you gonna run for Prime Minister?
Well, as much as I'm sure I'd win if I were to do that with your support, I'd probably got a busy time investing the funds. So I think we'd love to engage with the government more on this, and I would love to see more investors pushing for this and more of the community saying, yeah, this is something we see too and we need. And hopefully we can get some movement there and maybe change a bit of policy here and there.
Yeah, that's it. Dave's going into politics.
That sounds
great for all of us.
Sounds awful, doesn't it? Really.
No, I think that sounds good, and I hope that as you say, that kind of message is amplified a bit, and there's a wider discussion around it. Yeah. Thanks for listening.
As always. Hopefully next time we come to you, Seb will still be alive and won't have killed himself.
That's a trigger warning. You can't say that.
I can't say that. Right, good point.
Well, you have 30 seconds. Try it again.
So that was good chat. Looking forward to the next Deeptech Mash. Hopefully you won't have had a pulmonary embolism in between this one and the next one.
Yep.
And we've got some more exciting deep tech companies and rounds to announce in between now and then. So looking forward to it. And
lots more news to talk about and new technology. And if you want us to discuss anything else, as usual, let us know.
Or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks.